Well, earlier I spoke to NESG Chairman Olaniyi Yusuf. I began by asking him about 30 years of the summit and its impact on Nigeria and Africa in those years.
The first summit was in 1993, during the General Abacha period. It was a period where Nigeria was isolated from the rest of the world. The economy was in the tailspin, and some business leaders, led by Chief Ernest Sholekan, came together and said, we can't leave this country alone to the military to decide our economic path forward. Right. Let business leaders come, and they made a proposal to General Abacha, which he fortunately accepted. And that was the beginning of the first summit that happened in February 1993. And 30 years and interesting. Some wins, some misses, some near misses. But again, that is life. We had the reflection on the second day, during the anniversary dinner. And then we were looking back, that the whole pension reforms was first discussed at the summit in 2000, even though the Pensions Act came 4 years after. Right. Same thing with the Telecoms Act, same thing with the ICRC, the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission. Same thing with the PIA, the Petroleum Industry Act. So policy advocacy takes time. And that's why in 30 years, we have blessings we can count, but we also know there's much more work to be done for us to have the kind of country we would desire. And that's why the theme of this year's summit is collaborative action for growth, for competitiveness and stability. Right. Essentially saying, what do we need to do to promote more collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, international investors and the domestic investors, Nigerian investors and regional investors, because we had guests from Francophone African countries. They are part of the summit. The public sector, private development sector, how can we all act together to promote growth, to promote competitiveness, and to promote stability? Because once there's stability, then you can have more investment, you can have peace.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about some of your recommendations as far as this 30th edition is concerned. I mean, the key points that came up, during this particular summit, and then again, it's one thing to come up with recommendations. It's another thing for government to act on those recommendations. Indeed. How do you close that gap?
Indeed. So there are a few highlights. I think the first is on the fiscal and monetary side. Participants asked and tasked the central bank that would like to have more price stability. Right, so we've gone through a lot of volatility. Right. Price moves up and down. You don't know what the cost of your inputs will be tomorrow. You are not able to determine what your prices will be tomorrow. And so participants ask for some sense of price stability. So that's the first thing. I think the second is on policy complementarity. Right, so whether it's monetary policy, fiscal policy, trade and investment policy, even social policy, that we need all policy actors to work together and complement each other. And so participants ask for that. I think the other big thing that came out of the summit is that there is private capital that is available. Right. More than $2.3 trillion of private capital is available on the continent.
Accessing it is a challenge.
But absolutely. So that capital will go to destinations that are most attractive, destinations that guarantees a certain return on investment. And so the challenge for us in Nigeria is to really say, how can we be that destination that will attract a huge chunk of that?
And that's a question I'd like to ask you. And against the backdrop of JP Morgan looking to expand on the African continent, I believe Nigeria is one of the countries that JP Morgan is, planning to come to, which means Nigeria maybe is attractive, to companies like JP Morgan. What more does Nigeria need to do? What are the fundamentals in terms of making the country attractive to foreign investors?
Right. So, interestingly, I mean, the chairman, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jimmy Dimon, was at the summit today, and he spoke with us for close to an hour. And I think my summary and my key takeaway from that session is we have some natural advantages. 220 million people, huge land mass. Yeah. So we have those. But there's more work for us to do to be that destination. And I'll classify those work into your hard infrastructure and your soft infrastructure.
Right.
So the hard infrastructure are the things we know. Good roads, constant power supply,
Absolutely.
aviation, ports. Ports should be such that can permit export and import. So, but the soft part are also, in fact, the soft infrastructure is much more essential.
Right.
Right. So, education, you need to have skilled workforce. So education is important. You need to have stable legislation. You need to have predictable policies. And you also need to have judiciary that is very transparent.
Yeah.
So that there is sanctity of contract, whether it's mediation or arbitration. So those soft issues are as important, if not more important, than the hard issues. And that for me is the key takeaways or the things we need to do to make Nigeria more attractive to foreign and domestic investors.
Absolutely, very important. Bloomberg came out with a report recently that Nigeria's currency is the cheapest, underscore that, the cheapest currency in the world. And then you have the World Bank, on the other hand, saying that Naira is the most worst performing currency in the world. But in Bloomberg's report, it actually says that the Naira being cheap is an advantage. On the other hand,
Indeed.
You have the worst performing currency. What's your take?
Yeah, so again, that was one of the questions that we had yesterday at the summit. So the reality is that the Naira has been devalued by about 70% or so this year, which is fine. But what that means is our exports are now cheaper. So the things you produce in Nigeria should be easier for you to export and sell them to other countries, if we assume that the standards are okay.
Right.
And so our challenge would be to ensure that our trade policies is consistent with our monetary policy. Because monetary policy has made the Naira to be quite competitive. Naira is weak now. But it's now incumbent on us as private investors, as SMEs, to produce items that we can sell to the rest of the world. And indeed, another key message from the conference is that we now need to begin to look beyond Nigeria,
right,
and even think of an African Economic Summit Group, sort of Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Because Nigeria is 220 million. But guess what? Africa is 1.4 billion people. And so one of the key messages from the Francophone business leaders that were at the summit is you need to take this beyond Nigeria and see how you can leverage the African Continental Free Trade Area and open up this economic summit group to the rest of the continent.
Right.
And that way, Nigerian goods, Nigerian services can be exported to the rest of the continent.
Yeah, but when we talk about Nigerian goods, before I let you go, I mean, it's usually primary goods. How can we move from the primary goods level to finished product that can actually give us the value addition that we require in terms of currency earnings and, you know, other expectations?
Good question, and indeed very valid concern. And one of the feedback from the summit process actually is that we need to have an industrialization plan. How do we improve processing efficiency? How do we improve value addition to the products that we want to export? The NESG has committed to working with the Ministry of Trade and Investment, and in the next 1 month, we will come up with a draft of an industrialization plan that defines where do we have comparative advantages and where can we do extra value add, and to which markets can those then be exported. Right. And if you do that, that brings more effects that will support the work of the monetary authority. So it's all integrated in some form. And so yes, one of the recommendations is for us to have an industrialization plan, and the NESG has committed to working with the Ministry of Trade and Investment and also the Ministry of Finance and Coordination Ministry for the Economy to put that together.